got music.
Do we?
Yeah, we lost our music a while ago, but now we got it.
No way. Who lost our music?
I can't hear it.
Huh?
They can.
All right, good.
What's going on, guys?
All right. Solid, man. All right, well, welcome back to BRS TV Live, right?
Yeah.
Every Monday?
Every Monday.
3 o'clock.
Last couple Mondays, last Monday was mine. Solo.
They left me in New York at Reefapalooza.
Yeah.
They left me behind. So,
It's okay, we gave away his money. Don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah. Even what did somebody win last week?
I think it was like right at $500. An order or wish list, I forget.
All right, we'll move on quick, man. Let's get to the meat of this. So today we're going to put together a calcium reactor. We already put some of them together, but we're going to talk about what goes into it a little bit in real time, just a piece by piece. You can answer some questions that go along. Hey, Jacob, hello.
Different set here, as you can see. We're sitting down a little closer to the 160, a little intimate, you know. So there you go.
Ryan hurt his foot, so I don't know. I can't move around, so I gotta sit down. All right. So hey, as we do, give away stuff every week, and the first one we're gonna give away, or the only one, is to Jeff Kennedy from Good Hills, Michigan. $500 to your wish list.
Boom.
Ooh, if you want to be that person, join Preferred Reefer, the little tab just about everywhere in the website, in the header, footer, on the product pages. Become a Preferred Reefer, put up to $500 in your cart, win that, or your last order. You know, those things too.
Yeah, he had a Radeon. Radeon XR30.
Oh, and a magnet cleaner flipper.
Yeah.
Right on, man. XR30 and a flipper.
That'll
So,
help.
dude, $500. Right on, man. Yeah, actually, you know, it goes back to his account points, so he gets to buy something new. Maybe another Radeon.
Sweet.
Right on, man. All right, so we're going to get to the meat of it. So, anybody here want to learn about a calcium reactor, how to put it in? Raise your hand or give us thumbs up or something.
I think we've been saying that we were going to put this calcium reactor on the BRS160 for some time now.
I don't know. You know, it's amazing when you're producing like 8 videos a week now, like how little time you have to do anything else. You know, I was trying to talk to the team the other day. I'm like, yeah, so it should be like third leader of the company, third leader to my department, and like third content, but it's like 80% content at the moment.
Yeah.
So like we're just burning out stuff. I don't know if you'll really realize, but every Wednesday we're putting out 3 new videos. We got this one on Monday. We got Fridays Investigates, and we're working on like a product review thing too.
Trying to throw that in the mix.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I was trying to produce a presentation. We did one in Reefapalooza.
Yeah, a lot of people watched it.
22,000 people saw it.
Yeah, I saw that.
I know, I was terrified.
That's a pretty good weekend for it. But a lot of good reception too, warm reception for it.
Right on.
I think it went
Well,
over pretty good.
Hopefully I'll do another one sometime. I don't know. Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
All right, man. So calcium reactor. So we're gonna just kind of talk about what it is. We're gonna install it on the 160 here for the most part, and you get to follow on. We're also gonna talk about some of the different concepts as we do it in real time and how it applies, I guess, to this system here. Yeah. You can take that away, decide if you want this thing for your system, or if you did already, like how you adjust it. I don't know. You know.
Well, the first thing we need to talk about is what we're going to use for this. So I'm intimately familiar with this entire setup because I did all of those calcium reactor testing. In which case, all the equipment that we have here, I've used 100 different times.
Hey, and your questions today, be sure to ask them in real time because we're going to try to answer them in real time along with the actual topic or the component we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know, Dave here will try to do his best to pull those comments out and share them with us. So, list of stuff, man. Let's start with the first one. What's the main thing?
I mean, the biggest component right here behind us, the Vertex Calcium Reactor, the 6D calcium reactor.
I think you should share why it is you like that one. I'll share why I tend to use this one as well, but like there are a few different reasons out there.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I mean, my first one really comes down to we set up the calcium reactor, and not to discredit to Reef Octopus or anything like that, but when we set it up, like we could not get that thing to like the air noise and the sucking of the pump to leave it. But after all the times that I've emptied and reset and emptied and reset and emptied and reset the Vertex one, I'd come back the next day after changing media out or doing anything, and it'd be quiet.
Yep.
And like all the air gets trapped inside of this. They got this extra reactor chamber here for CO2 reaction and all this other stuff. But I'd come back to it, and there was plenty of times where I had to shake the body of the reactor to jostle up some loose air, and then get to know that it's even running.
Yep.
So it's one of the quietest. And then like setup is really simple for me. I've done it a bunch of times, but it's a size in whatever tank I'm going to set up. It's the size that I would use.
This is not going to go past like what is it, like 300 gallons or something?
Yeah. Upwards of 3 or so.
Okay, so I'm going to hit on his noise thing because I actually think this is pretty important. So in the XXL 750 video or the hybrid series, we talked about putting a DC pump on the Reef Octopus DC pump one on there. And you know what? I like DC pumps because they're super quiet, and that was one of the things for a lobby that was important. But I gotta tell you, this is one of the few instances where the AC pump seems to be quieter, and it is about the noise. And so, for those of you who don't know, you need to bleed all the air out of it, otherwise air is just circulating through, and air makes tons of noise. And so, in this one, we found that the air just it gets out of the system. And one of the things that it does is it has this little gas separating chamber, and this is supposed to create contact time for the CO2 and the water or the air-water interface, as it creates like a thin film of water over all of the little coils in there. What I found, what it actually does in actual use, is it creates an area where the air and water separate. Yeah. So from here will be air all the way to the top and water down to the bottom. And it's because it's got a small pipe here and a small pipe here and a big pipe here that allows it to do that. And so it just doesn't suck in a lot of air, and after it's been running for a little while. And because of that, it makes very little noise. I found the ones that have the same size pipe that goes all the way down back in do not separate the air and water the same way, and because of that, are just constantly getting the air and water mixed up, making tons of noise.
Yeah, and sometimes it'll pulse because it's got air. It'll take in water and then air, and then it'll take in water and air. So you hear this pulsing noise with it. So yeah, that's one of the biggest features I like about it. I think this, this flow thing does come in handy if you're not using the setup that we have, where you can get an idea of the flow that you're running through the thing, because it's relatively close. Like when I had the Comore set to 40, 50, 60 mils per minute, that little ball would be right around the same level. So it's relatively accurate.
I agree. When we were matching this thing to here, I was really surprised to see that how accurate it was and how much it matched up. Biggest thing is in the beginning, though, you got to make sure that there's no air bubbles trapped on the actual little flow guy, so to make sure that it's accurate. But after it's been running for a little while, that doesn't become an issue.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. The other thing is it comes on a plate here, which means I can actually remove some of these pieces, or all of them, and rearrange it to fit myself. So there's a nice little mounting plate on the bottom here that it all does fit on, but I can just kind of take it off as well. Yeah. So, and then rearrange it as I need it. So that's real nice. In the end, the PVC acrylic build looks sharp. But the main reason I think I'd use it is just the noise reason. And also it has this other second chamber here, which can house other medias. We're going to get into whether or not you can use magnesium in there and how you'd use it exactly, but whether or not it should be mixed in or in here. Also, some people use phosphate media and stuff in the top here. Yeah. So, these medias all have phosphate in them because they were live animals at one point in time, these corals that are in here. So,
Yeah, you make a good point, because this secondary chamber isn't just one single chamber. It's got a little cup in there that you can remove. So if you were running the phosphate media, you don't even have to take this whole thing apart. You unscrew the lid, you pull the little cup out, you replace it, you put it back in, and put the lid back on, you're done. So
I haven't actually used phosphate media. I'm curious how it would interact with the alkalinity and stuff in the water in there, and how long it would last. I know there's some really big medias, like the Eheim makes a big phosphate media. Actually, one of the things somebody talked about a lot is using the phosphate-covered media from Brightwell, that export stuff. Yeah. And so there's tiny little cubes that are covered in GFO powder that you could fill inside of here and then just replace them as needed. And the nature of how those pores work and everything means it's not going to clog and get all cemented to each other like normal phosphate media. Yeah. How it interacts with the alkalinity would be interesting, so maybe we'll do a little investigation and find that out.
Yeah, there you go.
Right enough. Chuck that down, actually. Fill it up with that media and see how it reacts to both alkalinity and the phosphate media.
Yeah, because we've tested this one to extent on what the alkalinity output is at the different pH points, what the alkalinity output is with the different types of media, different flow rates. We've done videos on all of that stuff. So
that'd be a great one.
It'd be pretty interesting to see. Just throw a little phosphate in there.
All right, so that's the reactor that we're going to meet. Anything else here? Oh, Glenn, thanks for the $1.99 coffee for us. How did you size the calcium reactor? So the size of the calcium reactor can't be too big, really, but it can be too small. Yeah. And so if it's too small, then you're not going to get enough contact time for the media to dissolve properly You're probably not going to hit max saturation rates and whatnot.
Yeah.
But really, I don't think there is such a thing as too big.
Too big? No.
You know, you're just giving more and more contact time, and it's just going to be more and more reliable and more stable.
True.
So, but something like this one, we did the math on at that max saturation of like a DKH of like 35-ish, you know, at a 6.5 pH. You know, this thing is going to be capable of running like a 350-gallon tank at like I'm not sure in this number 100%, but like a 1.5 DKH consumption a day.
It's a pretty good tank.
This is a big tank, super high consumption, and adequate for that. So if you're going to get bigger than this guy, it's because you got just a mammoth tank, or you just love oversized and stuff. But I wouldn't feel like compelled to like reach out of my wallet and dump out extra money for a bigger one. To be honest, man. I mean, there's that balance between, you know, efficiency and cost.
Well, I mean, you made a point in one of the videos too. Is however big of a calcium reactor you can fit in your space and reasonably afford, go with that one.
Yep, bigger is definitely better in this case. Like a skimmer, no, actually decreased performance in some cases if you get too big. In this case, it's just going to be more stable and reliable, especially as the media like kind of melts over time, you know, because the contact time, if it melts down to here, it's half. Well, I have half the contact time.
True.
You know, so in a bigger the media, the better, or chamber, the better. Would you recommend using a calcium reactor on a nano? I don't think it's probably worth the money.
No, probably not. I mean, 2-part is probably, or Kalkwasser.
Yeah.
Most cost effective and will get the job done even on a high demand nano tank too. So,
I mean, it would be like a really tricked out nano to have a calcium
Oh, yeah.
reactor. I mean, the sump area would be twice as big as the actual tank.
You probably run at 1 mil per minute if you were using the Kimura or something.
Can a calcium reactor setup run outside of the sump? Yeah, this one is definitely going out. Most of them, I think,
Most of them are, yeah. And then some, I mean, I think I've seen a couple of them inside a sump if you have the space, but I just don't see a reason why.
I think the inside the sump ones would be the rarity, actually. So most of them are designed to be external. And can you put just a list of components in your calcium reactor? We're going to go through them right now. There's like 7 of them.
So we got the first one, which was the calcium reactor itself.
And what do you feel the best set points are on the AP? I don't know. We're going to suggest having the pH at 6.5, and then using the calculator over on the like calcium reactor setup help website.
Yeah, if you Google calcium reactor setup help, there's a calculator there. Now you have to know there's a couple points you have to know about it too, like the effluent of the output, what your tank DKH is, and what your flow rate is.
There's a couple of set points you need to load in there, and it'll tell you
three different
flow
things.
rate.
Yeah, it'll tell you exactly what you need.
So one of the things you want to do is just peg the pH, man. Just pick one somewhere between. If you had a super low demand tank, you know, pick a
6.8 and above, 6.9 and above.
Yeah, if you have a high demand tank, probably 6.4, 6.5, right? Just pick one and then stay there, right? I'm going to say it's probably best to pick like just 6.5, and if somebody's going to ask me, that's the number I'd just pick, and then adjust the flow rate coming out of it. Because at 6.5, you should have, with this kind of media and contact time, you should have a DKH of about 35 coming out of the calcium reactor all day long.
Yeah.
So you're just looking for something stable. All right, we'll save a couple of those questions there. We'll move on. So we got this piece. What is the next one here?
What the media is. This is the Two Little Fishies Reborn media. Yep. In the performance of the different types of medias, where I tested that aragonite style type of media, like Carob Sea, Brightwell, which are similar types of media, but granular size were different, just slightly. Brightwell was a smaller granule size.
Yeah, the smaller one means that it will have more contact area, but also can clog a little faster. So, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. But
but out of the differences between those, the Reborn media from Two Little Fishies that is bits of skeleton, it's coral skeleton, versus the aragonite stuff, this actually had more, like 17%, 17% more concentrated effluent at the same pH set points. So you're getting a little more bang for your buck when it comes to like how much alkalinity and calcium the effluent has in it.
It dissolves a little easier at a higher pH. I would say that it's also, something to be said for the fact that it looks like little coral fingers, so it just makes you feel better. Behind the scenes, I will share that all of them do have phosphate in them, and this one was actually the highest.
The most, yeah.
So that's one of the things we're like working on. And I don't know where it went, but Elos we used to sell this thing. It was a man-made calcium reactor media, as synthetic, and presumably it didn't have any of the phosphate and stuff in it. Probably no trace elements or whatnot either, but that's a big advantage, I think. If you could have a media that was kind of lab clean, just calcium and carbonate or bicarbonate or calcium carbonate. And so, I don't know. But yeah, we just use this one here because that's what a lot of people use. And I can't help it. I like the idea of taking old coral skeleton and turning it into new coral skeleton.
That's really cool.
It's a pretty solid concept. All right, so the next thing was the Kimura pump.
This guy.
All right, got it right here. So a lot of you guys, let's see if we can see it
There
here.
you go.
All right, so all right, we can pick it up here. So this is a continuous duty dosing pump. So the difference between this dosing pump and all the other ones you might have seen is that it's designed to run 24/7. So continuous duty. Most of them are designed to run for a couple thousand hours or whatever. And if you do the math on that, it's a surprisingly short period of time. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so this one here will run all the time, all day, every day.
24/7.
24/7, right?
From as low as like 1 mil per minute all the way up to 120 mils per minute.
Doesn't even do fractions of a milliliter. I don't know. But
I don't know.
yeah, it definitely goes down to 1 milliliter a minute.
Yeah.
And so this is the perfect thing for a calcium reactor because it used to be, like drip rates and whatnot. And there's a needle valve on this guy right here that will get the drip rate.
Right.
But over time, things clog those things, and
sure.
so you have all those problems with the flow rate might be 20 milliliters a day, but tomorrow it's 10, the next 5. And then the little rock busts loose and it's 40 again.
And now you're, and then the whole time your alkalinity is fluctuating.
Well, and then before you had the little valve or the gauge on here, you had to like pour it and time it in a minute into a cup to find out what you really had. It was a big pain in the
super
butt.
difficult.
Yeah, and so that was one of the instability factors. And so I would call this the biggest addition to calcium reactors in ever.
Yeah, because the option for continuous duty prior to that was something I went and searched for. Was you go on eBay back when you went on eBay and you found the hospital grade Masterflex Cole Palmer $4,000+ big giant loud continuous duty dosing pumps. But then you could base your calcium reactor on flow, which made it super easy.
$3,000 pumps new.
Yeah, I found mine luckily on eBay
This
for
is
$400. So this is like 250, 260 somewhere around there. Yeah.
So I mean it's a big change. So if I were considering a calcium reactor, which isn't the cheapest thing to do begin with, I wouldn't even do it without one of these. There's other components today here, man, I may or may not do with, but this one I would not do without.
It makes adjusting your calcium reactor as easy as 2-part, where I need more alkalinity, I turn it up. I need less, I turn it down.
So yeah, you set your pH. pH will peg the concentration inside of here, and then dose 20 milliliters a day. If the levels are dropping your tank, do 25 milliliters.
Yeah.
Still drop it, 30. It's all done. So and it starts to go up. I pull a bunch of corals out of the tank, frag them, sell them, whatever. Well, now levels are probably going to rise because I don't have as much in there. So turn it down.
Yeah, super simple.
Yeah, super easy. You can even make that noise if you want.
If you wanted to.
So I don't know. I would definitely. This is really what I think has made the whole thing really a lot easier. All right, and then we have an Apex. Which
is behind my shoulder, back in the corner over here. But basically, that's what we're controlling the pH with.
Yeah, so you're going to control the pH. You're going to turn on off the solenoid on the regulator to add CO2 as needed. Rather than do all kinds of bubble counts and whatever.
Yeah.
And we will do a little bit of that after this, but that's going to be the secondary backup. And what we're going to do is use a regulator. And just for this ease of use, we have a regulator here that opens up, and we also have a pH controller here. And so, you can use your Apex as well. And the Apex, there's a point where the Apex just becomes a no-brainer. And once you start to get into like calcium reactors and stuff, it's like, well, for the $500, why am I wasting my money on all these other external controllers?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got more equipment on my tank that I'd like to turn off and on based off of parameters of my system and pHs and all that. Whereas the pH pH controller only turns off and on the CO2 regulator. So what if I wanted to shut off my feed pump to it? What if I wanted to shut off my lights or do all this other stuff? There's added value in all of that. Plus, when you get the Apex, if you get the full Apex, not the EL version, or you have the full classic version, they have 2 ports, one for pH, one for ORP.
Oh, yeah.
Secondary purpose the ORP one, so you can still have a pH port in your tank, and then repurpose the other one for this pH.
Yeah, so for those of you though, there's a lot of people that just don't want to bother with a aquarium controller. It's like more complexity than desired, or yada yada yada. In this case, there is just these things are like what, $100 or so.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, it's
Okay.
It's on sale right now, but yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you can get this one. Actually does ORP and pH on it actually, but you can get one that does ORP only. That's pretty simple. And then I want to set my pH.
Turn the dial.
There it is, man. I changed my pH, and that's as easy as setting this thing up. So I want to set it to 6.5. I set it right between the 6 and the 7, and that's all I had to do. Now the concentration in my calcium reactor is going to be even and stable. So that is as simple as it gets. Just going to open and control and power the solenoid and open it and close it. The next thing is the CO2 regulator. So this is called the carbon doser that we're going to use.
The electronic one.
So there are cheaper options.
There definitely are cheaper options.
This guy's what, $350?
Somewhere around there. Yeah, some of the like Toonsy has a good one. Milwaukee, I think we still have it, has a good one too. But they're more basic function where you have an electronic open and close solenoid, and then you can adjust the bubbles and all this other stuff.
So the regulator here is just going to screw on to the onto your CO2 tank, right? For those who don't know what this does, this thing is super high powered. Hopefully it goes on. Well, there we go. All right, so this thing is super high powered. God, I don't know what the PSI is inside of it, but it's really high. So we don't want that kind of PSI going into our reactor. It's going to explode. Yeah. So what we do is it measures the PSI going into it, and then it regulates it down. And that'd probably be somewhere between like 3 and 15 PSI for most people.
Right.
There's a few different reasons we'll get to in a minute. And so for most people, you just want to pick a good one. Open and honest, we had a Milwaukee one before. It was pretty cheap. I think it was like $70. And it got so many bad reviews that we just stopped carrying it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That one lasted like a year. The Tunes one, though, however, has been really good. Mm-hmm. And so the Tunes one, I don't know how much exactly it is, but it's a little bit more than $70 for sure. But it works, and it's a reliable unit. This one, and what you're going to do with those things is set the regulator to your 3 to 15 psi.
Yeah. Which
and
is
there's
your bubble.
Needle valve in there too that's going to let the air out like super slow. And so you're looking for these slow little bubble rates coming out of it, and you want to control the amount of bubbles. That's also a piece that tends to drift over time with a lot of them.
For some reason, they just like to either let out less bubbles over time because it's closing or it's getting stuck, or more bubbles over time, depending on the pressure of the tank.
More CO2 means also the media is going to melt a little faster, right? So we want to control that rate as best as possible. So this guy right here, you change it to 5. And I think we'll get a close-up of this guy if we can. All right. So I'll change it to 5. And now I have 5 bubbles per second. I'll change it to 9. I'll change it to 1, or a fraction of 1. And so getting the bubble rate now is super easy. Mm-hmm. And that's why most people use these things. And you're using that conjunction with your CO2 regulator, right? Yeah. Or our CO2 controller. So this is going to be the primary. It's going to turn it on and off and keep it exactly at the 6.5 that we're looking at. And then this guy's the backup. So if it needs a few bubbles a second, we'll turn it to just over that. And if this thing ever failed, now it will barely do just an overdose just slightly.
Yeah.
Instead of letting out tons. So that's how those things are going to work. And then your last piece you had was some parts you modified for the pump.
So we have videos if you're wondering about how to build the reactor and a few things like that. We've got videos on them, but I also did a video on the Comore pump where as you can see, we changed this to 1/4-inch push connect, which is pretty much almost all of the calcium reactors I come in contact with have 1/4-inch polyethylene type tubing on it, a rigid 1/4-inch tubing, in which case to make the Camor easier to use with that, we just adapted it with some barb stemmed adapters. So you have the tube that comes with the Camor, and all you have to do is get this little barb stem adapter, and then get a straight union push connect. And now we're push connect with the whole rest of the system.
So if you look for those things on the website, it's called a barb to stem adapter, and it's a Murloc fitting, and it's a barb end on this side, and on the other end it's a stem that just slides into a push connect fitting, and then what is just a push connect union.
Yep.
And now both sides of these things are push connect and can be used for anything you want. So that is a few bucks. You can convert this thing to polyethylene tubing, quarter-inch tubing. Yeah, it definitely makes it a lot easier.
You can disconnect and connect it super quick.
So that's all of the stuff that you need to set this thing up. There's a couple of, it's not cheap. I think you probably got into this for at least $1,000. To do this. You got like a $300 pump, $300 regulator. You probably picked up a used. Oh, we didn't talk about the CO2 canister. So you can buy new CO2 canisters from us. I would advise not doing that.
Don't do that.
Some places just don't have them, or you want one that's brand new and super shiny because it's going to bling out your setup, then it would do that.
Yeah.
In which case you need to go find a place to fill it rather than swap it. But for most people, you're going to do a swap like you would with propane or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So where you can swap it is very often places like a home brewing store, a welding store.
There's some general gas companies. We have this welding shop plus gas company that has oxygen, acetylene, helium, all these other different types of gases and stuff there. You can swap them out for like $20, I think. Yeah,
they're pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of buy the first one, right? But it's used and a lot cheaper. But if you want a brand new one that's all shiny, you're going to have to go around and have it filled for you, which is a little bit more of a hassle. So you have to call those places and say, can you fill this for me? In which case some of you can. All right. That's Joey, man, $2. Thank you very much. Shout out to Joe Thomas at BRS. All right, man. Awesome, man. Great customer service. We'll let him know.
Thank you. Thanks, Joey.
$10. Grab some coffee. Faded. Appreciate that, man. We're getting beyond coffee now. Like, we're going to have to get the whole staff. All right, thank you very much. How do you properly tune the carbon doser? I can't get the 1 bubble per minute. So that's one thing is like, this isn't a perfect science. So for when you're 1 bubble per minute, it's per second, by the way. But
minute's pretty slow.
That would be pretty slow, yeah. So people complain once in a while. They like, oh, it popped up 2 bubbles, you know, and sometimes it splits the bubble in half, so it kind of like makes it look like that. I would say if it's super off, you should probably call customer service, see if we can get like swapped out. But for the most part, you're just getting it really close. It isn't like ultimate perfection. For ultimate perfection, you'd probably be into this for more than you want. It's just really close. But I will tell you this: I've never met anybody that's used one and said like every system I would buy would have this on it. For sure.
That's me. I said that. Because I got one of these a long time before I came here, like 4 or 5 years ago, or what have you. And I won't never set one up without using it too.
Josh at WWC laughed at us when we said
because that I love it.
No, if you wouldn't use it.
If you wouldn't use it,
no way, man.
All of WWC, it's too reliable.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as setup usually goes, I'll probably set it at like 5, just to kind of start with, and then we'll get a little bit later on, the pressure of your coming out of it, but and then you're basically the pH controller is going to control whether or not it's on. So if you find that thing is just constantly on and you never see your pH hitting your set point at like 6.5, turn it to 4 instead, so you get more bubbles. And then if that works, if that doesn't work, turn it to 3.
There's also, you got to make sure you have it on the right pressure. So you got to be able to crack the check valve that's in there. We'll get to that later as well. But that is definitely a couple things I want to look at. And just make sure you're looking for reasonable. If it's like every 55 seconds or fractions of a second, or it doesn't need to be super perfect. So how do you set the Camor to pull through? I cannot get the siphon going.
Oh, I did a video on that one too. Well, for the most part, I covered it. But so for this one in particular, for the Vertex in particular, the pull has worked really well for me. All of those times that I tore it down, set it up, tore it down, set it up when I was doing the BRS Team Investigates. This is my cheater hose, and this is why I have it in here. But basically, I make sure that all the chambers are full as I can get them to capacity, and then I'll fill right through the pH port. I like to use this little feed pump to fill up my reactor because it fits in the pH probe hole. The half-inch tubing does perfectly, but it only takes a couple seconds to fill up. But as soon as I get this fill, especially on this one, on the inside of the lid, there's a stem that comes down from the underside of the lid, and that's where the liquid actually draws from. And I found as long as I get the water level inside my reactor to make sure that it covers that hole or that little stem that comes down, then everything else is full, and I start the recirculation pump, and I kick that on my Camor, turn it to 120. It takes a little bit to suck all the air out and build that negative pressure. I mean, all the connections have to be tight, all the lids have to be tight, the pH probe has to be on there tight, because you're just sealing off any drawing of air from outside the reactor body. But then it pretty much works like a straw, and I set it to my Camor to 120 until I get a steady stream coming out, and then I go back to my flow rate.
So for those of you wondering what that means, you can choose to fill the reactor and dose it by pumping water into it, or you can choose to pump water out of it by creating a vacuum in there. And this little guy will pinch off air and slowly suck all the air out of it. But I would definitely fill it first because it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a really long time before it creates a negative vacuum in air that would fill up the whole thing.
Yeah.
But if it's just that last little bit, then probably not a problem.
Yeah.
But so I would definitely fill it up with water there, Derek, and get it as full as you can to start off with if you're going to pull through it.
Yeah.
Just real quick, one of the benefits of pulling through it is that, like, if the reactor ever spraying a leak, you would essentially just empty the reactor. If the reactor's spraying a leak and you're putting water into it, it would flood onto your floor or whatever. Like
however deep your intake line was inside your sump, you continue to push water from that.
So if you're screwed on the caps here and got like a little rock or something in there and didn't seat right, all of a sudden now you have a leak on your hands. Whereas alternatively, your problem might actually be that when you're pulling it, is the little rock is in there and it's not creating the vacuum, and so air is coming in instead.
Yeah.
So that might be another answer to your question.
But we did end up on the 750XXL. We had the Reef Octopus one there, and we tried pulling through it every which way. We refilled it, we reprimed it, we pulled, we refilled, reprimed, repulled. Just didn't like it. It just would not work.
I couldn't understand
so
that either.
We ended up switching it around to where we were pushing through it, and then no problem.
Yeah, so there you are. How do you keep the next one? If I'm doing weekend water changes, do I need to have my calcium reactor running, where am I at? Running my calcium number is 450. So if you're doing weekend water changes, do you still need to have it running? I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't.
No, this is one that, again, depending on how deep it was in the sump. So the only reason I would shut off my calcium reactor if I was doing a water change, if I was doing a massive one in my sump, in the chamber that had my feed line for the calcium reactor, where I knew that the water level would go below the feed line of the calcium reactor. Yep. I'd maybe shut it off then. But that's far and few between instance, I think. So that's something I'd worry about. All
right, man. Well, let's just a couple more, and then we'll move on and start putting it in. So do you find that an aquarium controller is a must for the calcium reactor? So either aquarium controller or a pH controller, and must is too strong of a word. There's definitely reefers out there that have figured out the perfect bubble rate and have figured out the perfect flow rate. But I also this project or equipment has been technologically way over so many people's heads and willingness to implement it and trying to do the mad scientist thing and trying to so. I would say not necessary, absolutely necessary, but for the average person, it's going to make it a million times easier. If I can just peg the pH of this thing to 6.5 and know that my concentration is always going to be 35 DKH coming out of this thing, and that's just how much I flow. And anyone, there isn't a single one of you that's not watching this thing couldn't set this thing to 6.5 and then put this thing on and say, 20 milliliters, I test tomorrow, my alkalinity drop, let's do 25.
Yeah.
Every single person can do that. Now, if you're not using this thing, it's going to get a little hairier, man, because you're going to have to figure out the right combination of CO2 going in to the flow rate going out, and one has an inverse reaction on the other one. It's going to be a whole lot of intuitive trial and error, and there's tons of reasons why that could work, but get ready to be a pro and have a high learning curve. If you buy the extra $100 controller or buy an actual aquarium controller like the Apex, it gets a million times easier, and the only thing is a little dial. And even if it isn't this dial and you want to just skip on the continuous dosing pump, now all I'm doing is using the needle valve and measuring how much the thing does in a minute in a cup, or using the little gauge on the side of a reactor like this one. It just makes it so much easier to peg the pH in here. Do you have to do it? No. Should you do it? Almost certainly, especially if you're asking the question. The people that don't need it wouldn't ask the question. They'd already have one. They've had 3 years worth of experience, already doing it.
Sweet.
So in the GPH, what's the max that Chemours can do? It's not gallons per minute. 120 milliliters a minute is the max that it will do, right?
Yeah, that's 120. So you can turn that over into gallons per hour. If you're talking about from a gallons per hour perspective, where maybe you're thinking about using this for some kind of water change or something, probably not.
Yeah, I don't. Well,
this is its. I would say. I mean, this could be used for a number of different things. This is my primary purpose for this thing, for sure.
I wish I would have pulled the price on this thing. Dave, do you happen to know what it is? Can you look it up? So he'll tell us in a second. But if you're gonna do auto water changes, man, an Apex and the dose is like the best way to go. You could buy 2 of these guys and do it, but it's not going to be enough savings to justify
having 2 of them, and makes you turn you. I mean, you'd have to have some kind of Apex to turn one on that puts water out, and turn one on that puts water in.
Well, you can use timers and stuff too, man, or just set it to a super low
steady
flow rate.
5 mils per minute, and then just let that go continuously every day.
Yeah, it's more work than it's worth when you just tell the Apex do 3% water change every day. So, I don't think it's going to be enough. Did you find it, buddy? All right, we're almost there. So that's the max, though. It does 120 milliliters. It is kind of loud at 120 milliliters.
Yeah.
It's whirring a little bit.
Understandable.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's
pretty fast.
In the case of the calcium reactor, that's what's really nice about for this application is if I start to hit those 90, 100, 110 flow rates, and it's just not keeping up with my alkalinity in my tank, I can just drop the next pH point down.
It'll be 40.
And then slow the pump down back to 20 and start back increasing again. So
that's actually why I suggest just starting at the bottom, is because you can make the longevity of your tubing and pump and everything a lot easier.
Yeah.
There's some reasons to believe it'll actually, even though it's a lower pH, have a lower impact on the pH of the tank. That's something like a BRS TV Investigates episode will do, but there's some reason to believe that. How much was it?
260.
Yeah, 260. So you're going to be in this thing for $520. I mean, I guess it'd be cheaper than that, significantly cheaper than Apex and the dose at that point. But I still would do that.
Yeah.
This would work. Just a little hairier.
Yeah. That's a really good question above that one. At what point would you switch from dosing to from 2-part dosing to a calcium reactor? And he's currently dosing 120 mils of alkyl a day. And what would would you suggest moving over? I mean, this is probably alkaline or 2-part can go the distance for every tank. We used to mix it up in 5-gallon buckets for the BRS160 here. We were at 160 some mils per day of just straight soda ash and calcium chloride for daily consumption. And we could have turned that, we could have let that go the distance in maybe even upwards of 2, maybe, or 200 plus mils. 300 plus.
The only part where it hits is if your density of coral is so strong that you end up messing with the salinity when you're dosing too much to a smaller size tank. In that case, this thing doesn't mess with salinity; it does mess with the pH a little bit. But that's it. In fact, I'll just tell you right now, man. I mean, there's a lot of pros that use calcium reactors, and for that reason, it's kind of attractive. But it's a gear junkie thing, man.
For sure.
That's
exactly why I bought one.
Yeah, I want 2 dosing pumps and some 2-part. But for a lot of people, the hobby is fun, cool gear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the fact
that you can't open up the aquarium stand and have your friend standing there, and they see this contraption going on here. and then you get to explain to them what it does, how it does
melts
it.
old coral
It's awesome.
skeleton, so new coral can grow
Yeah.
in it. So all the new corals in there that you see, all that awesome growth,
It's awesome.
it's actually little bits of this were melted
Bragging.
back down so it could be reused.
Bragging point.
That's a different thing than like, yeah, I use calcium chloride and sodium carbonate. I don't know. So for a lot of people, cool factor wouldn't matter, man. But like for a lot of people, it's gear. So I don't think there's a point at which, man, like
There's this definite like switch. I don't think so.
I mean, I've seen people endlessly try to, evaluate the cost differences between the two. In relation to like two-part, like bulk two-part, like where the costs are $3 a month for most people.
Right.
There is no equation where that works, man.
No.
Like it will never happen. If you're using something like a normal two-part like retail additive that's $30 a month, there is definitely a point at where there is a return on investment. But one of the things that almost never gets calculated into is a equipment cost.
Initial costs.
Yeah, so like eventually when the pump's gonna fail, this one will fail in 3 years, like every 3-4 years, like everything with a plug in it will fail. So, you gotta replace stuff. So it's not like an economic decision.
No.
No, it's a cool factor decision for sure.
But 120 mils per day, that's, I would say that's not much for some of the tanks that I've ran before either. But if you do decide to move over, you can use that 120 mils per day of calculation that you have, and Ryan's got a video on it on a Reef FAQ, and then there's the online calculators that he used in that video. But basically, you just plug in, I dose 120 mils per day. This is my target alkalinity and where it's stabilized at, and you give the specs of your calcium reactor, and it'll spit out like a flow rate that you would need to match your calcium reactor or to match your two-part.
Yeah, it couldn't be really any more simple. It just already knows your dose. And it only works with a handful of things. Like Randy's two parts the same as BRS's two parts in concentration. So I'd look at that. All right. Well, gosh, man, the questions are coming in rapid.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's answer a couple of questions after a little bit here. So we're going to get a little further into this thing. So step one, man, is you put the thing together, right? I'm not going to bother trying to tell you how to put all the tubes together because we've already done 2 videos on all that. But you follow the instructions and you put the tubes in the places that they go. But more or less, you're recirculating this is just a secondary chamber right here. And so more or less, let's see here, more or less, you're just circulating meaning around this in a direction,
In the main chamber.
Yep, and it's just mixing CO2 and water together constantly and slowly melting the media. So it's again like in this specific one, it separates the air and CO2 out and gives it additional contact time. But I think this is the only one that I've seen that does that.
Yeah, that's
like this anyway. And so you're just setting it up, and then the media eventually goes through this secondary chamber here, which does seem to take off a little teeny bit of the pH, and it does add in a little bit of concentration
from a little more contact time, probably.
or I should say a little bit of the CO2, and adds a little bit of contact time into it. So there you go. So you just put it together as instructions said. We won't bother with like everywhere every last hose goes.
Right.
Again. Then you're going to use your media. And so I would suggest getting like a colander or something like this, and you're going to pour your media into the top. Randy does a little different to me. I'll show you.
This specific colander, because it's got the wider edges here, fits perfectly over a 5-gallon bucket. It sits right on there.
Believe it or not, this is OXO, and we actually sell it for random things like this.
Yeah. It's sitting over a 5-gallon bucket. And then I put a little bit of media in it. I take it over to where we've got a big, giant RODI bin back here that has a spout on it that I can just turn the spout on and run it over the top of the media. Otherwise, I'll just take another 5-gallon bucket, because who doesn't have 105-gallon buckets around? And pour it over the top, mix it, pour it over the top, and throw that off to the side. Do a couple more of those. And now my media is rinsed with RODI water.
All right. So just like carbon for me, I rinse it right in the sink just because it's a lot easier. That means that it may be chlorinated and whatnot, but it's so little and it probably reacts with the media like instantaneously. You can let it dry out afterward if you want, if you're worried about it. But I just take it to the sink and literally just rinse it out and get all the dusty fines out. And this will probably work the best to get the fines out over trying to recirculate RODI water. If you're super anal about it and like don't want any signs of chlorine or whatnot, I wouldn't blame you one bit. Do it his way. But I know a lot of people probably do it this way too. So yeah, just rinse it all out, and this thing holds like 1.5 bags of that stuff.
Yeah, 2 little fishies reborn. If you get the 4.4 pound bag, it will hold right at 1 3/4 of those bags.
So almost 2 bags.
Almost 2 bags.
So pick up 2 bags. The bags the meat will last you a really long time, and
Yeah.
essentially you have a little bit of top off in there as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
by the time you top it off, order another bag. It's not that expensive. All right.
So we plumbed it. We've got media in it. Then we gotta fill it with water.
Okay.
We gotta fill the bubble counter with water.
So here's the bubble counter, guys, and let's see here. It's kind of in here.
Yep.
You're gonna screw off the top, and we're gonna add some water to this thing. Can you zoom in on it? All right. So let's do that. Does the top come off on this one?
Don't.
Oh, this one you have to pump water into
Yep.
it.
You have to pump water into it.
Oh, okay. So this one doesn't actually, the top doesn't come off. So we're just gonna have to pump some water in here, and I don't know if we're gonna be able to do that on camera here. But the water level will be like right here, right? And when the water goes in there, we'll watch the gas bubbles just kind of go up through it one by one, and that's where you start counting. Is it 3 bubbles a second, 4 bubbles a second?
Yeah.
And you just time it. So there you go. I thought that screwed off for sure, but I guess it does not. So many of them it does absolutely screw off. This one you just pump the water in.
This is super easy.
Kind of thing that you do once.
Yeah, and the way I feel it, like before you put the whole thing together, because on this one specifically, the flow meter here doesn't allow you to pull it back through the bracket that it's in. But basically, I just use the quarter-inch push connect fittings here, and I've got tons of this 1/4-inch tubing laying around. So I'll just put some in there, and then or I'll start a little siphon from it. So I'll put this down below the water level. Start a little siphon in the 1/4-inch tubing, one end in my sump, or tank, one end in here. And
You
then
should use fresh
shove it in
water.
there. So
Yeah, I think normally you use fresh water.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can do that
You
way.
can do that way, too.
People actually have bubble coating fluid, and I think it makes a more consistent bubble or whatnot.
oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but all right, well there you go. And so then the next step, man, is add the pump. And again, we talked about it a little earlier, man. So we're gonna add this pump on here, and pull the tube. Which tube is it? So we're gonna pull.
This is the discharge going to the. So this is your effluent line, and it's just the way we have it routed. Of course, the pump turns clockwise here, so of course it'll go into the bottom one because that's coming out of the pump.
Yeah.
And this is since we're
We have a
sucking
tube.
through it, we're going to this one.
This one. All right, there you go.
Now, basically, this comes out of after all of the flow goes in there. This comes out of the flow meter and then into the pump. So it's like a straw sucking on the flow meter, which is basically like drinking a milkshake through your calcium reactor.
All right, so now I'm doing 20 milliliters a minute. You can hear it doesn't make any noise at 20 milliliters. And it's just spinning, and we'll eventually create a vacuum in here and suck all the water out. All right,
Yeah.
so there's a little glare there.
Oh,
there we go.
Look at that.
So you can see it's just 20 milliliters a minute, and if I wanted to crank it up, I just turn it there, and it is now 24 milliliters. So each little bump looks like it does about 2. So it's super, super easy to do. We are now pumping water through it at a controlled rate. All right, I think I'll just stop it though for the moment.
Sweet.
All right, and then again, I just want to touch on one last bit, just a refresher on the theory of how this works. Is what we want to do is create a controlled effluent coming out of here. I mean, all the solution that's inside the reactor is the exact same DKH, right? And the way that you're going to test that is once you set it up, is just take the DKH and do your normal test kit on it. You may have to dilute the solution by half, for a test kit or your HANA checker or whatnot to read it. So that means if your HANA checker takes 10 milliliters of solution to work, you'd add 5 milliliters from the effluent going in there, and then 5 milliliters of RODI water, and then when you get the result, you just double it.
Yeah.
Right? So in this case, it would come out at like 17 and a half, and you would say it's 35.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So pretty simple on that front. So I think, any other issues on pushing or pulling? Well, the concept. So yeah, we're just going to keep the alkalinity the same in here when we're going to control the flow rate afterward. So keeping the alkalinity the same, only thing you need to be concerned about really is making sure the pH stays the same. So open and closing that solenoid.
Yeah, true.
All right. So anything else on whether or not you pull or push with this guy?
Like I said, for me, specifically with this one, the Vertex Calcium Reactor, it was super easy for me to get it to pull through, and a couple days later, 24 hours later, and be quiet and pulling through. And multiple times, because I was running I think I had the whole BRS Investigates around calcium reactors going for 3 months or so in different configurations, different speeds on the pump. And when I'd go to calibrate after changing out a test, I'd recalibrate the Camor, and it'd be like right on, within a mil or 2 mils or something. So it doesn't change, doesn't vary very often.
So I would say these are the two levers you're pulling here. It's easier to prime if you push water through it.
Yeah.
It's safer for your household if you pull water through it, right?
True.
So if you have problems getting it to prime for whatever reason with your particular system, maybe there's an air leak in there, which should leak then at that point. But if you're having problems, then just push it through. But make sure you're watching it to make sure that there's not water coming out of it anywhere afterward, because it is outside of your sump. You know, inside your sump, something leaks, it's not a big deal. Outside the sump, it's a bigger deal. So if you're going to push it through, just make sure to check for leaks, periodically. They sell those things like the little watchdog water alarms and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you buy Home Depot, it's $10, and it's a little sensor you send on there, and it sends off an alarm, like a fire alarm went off in your house if it ever detects water. So if you're going to push through it, spend the $10 on one of those is a really good idea. All right. So then the CO2 canister and regulator will set up. So again, this is a CO2 canister, and you're just going to screw your selected regulator onto the side of it. And so there's a couple of different things you're going to do when you do that. Remember, you can remember the actual steps or the order that you do them.
As far as getting gas through this specific CO2 regulator.
Crank this one all the way down.
Crank it so that it's all the way open. In that it won't. It's not pressurizing the actual regulator itself. So it's at zero.
Okay. So there's no pressure.
There's no pressure.
Zero.
It's at zero. As if so basically, if I had this thing screwed in, the more I screw this in and tighten up that tighten up this regulator here, I'll see an increase on my PSI, and that's the PSI that it's allowing through my regulator. Mm-hmm. In which case, if I have this thing have any type of pressure on it, and I could just crank open my CO2. There's a lot of pressure in here, and it pegs that regulator so quick that it can break inside of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So regardless, make sure you follow the actual instructions on this regulator or any of them when you're setting it up. Because they may have some very specific steps on what you need to do when you open up this valve and let the pressure free.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so make sure that you absolutely follow the instructions, but it is definitely start all the way one direction and then slowly turn it in until you get the pressure you're looking for. And the pressure really kind of depends on your specific system, the reactor you bought. It depends on your check valve that you're using. It depends on maybe the regulator too. And I've seen, we went looking online, and we've seen people as low as like 3 psi, and you run it at like 15, right?
Yeah. There's sometimes the check valve, depending on the check valve that you have, sometimes they're a little harder rubber seal in them, sometimes they're not. This is the check valve that comes with the carbon doser one, and I found that I'd come back at times, and if I had it down at 10, if I had 10 psi coming through here on my pressure, it just wasn't enough to push through the rubber seal inside of the check valve, in which case I couldn't get bubbles to come out of here. So I had to give it a little more pressure, a little more oomph to get through that check valve.
So just for your reference point, this is the check valve on this thing, and so what it's designed to do is make sure when the reactor's pressurized that it isn't pushing water up into the regulator, which would ruin it. And so, especially because it's salt water, it will, even if it doesn't ruin it that second, it will ruin it later.
For sure.
So there's a check valve in here that makes sure that only air goes this way and water doesn't go this way. And a check valve does have a certain pressure that's required to break it.
Yeah.
And by break it, I mean break the seal intentionally. And so at this one, I had the same problem where I needed to make sure that like I turned it up just a little bit past where the regulator actually said to be able to break this thing reliably. Otherwise, it would get stuck.
Yeah.
So some people, you want to play around with that a little bit. You know, I would definitely read the instructions. I know all of the Octopus ones, I believe, recommend 10 psi. You know, for their systems. And again, depending on how you set it up, you can be pressurizing the actual reactor.
Oh yeah,
well.
we saw that at Reefapalooza, New York this last weekend.
Oh yeah.
He had pressure buildup in his reactor for some reason. I think for one of his setups, I think it was whatever regulator he was using, malfunctioned or stayed on or something like that. Pressurized his system off. And didn't blow just the screw portion of the whole calcium reactor off. It actually broke. It was so pressurized it broke acrylic, and rather than, which is, I mean, it says a lot about the build quality of this thing, where it's not the joints that are glued in and all these other things. Actually broke the acrylic portion.
Yeah, so that's another concept to think about when you're deciding to like push or pull. If you are going to pull, I've essentially put a pump on the back end, which allows the thing to pressurize more easily, right? If I push into it, even though there's a needle valve, or sometimes there's some things on the outside, the pressure would actually just squirt out more fluid, which
right.
may be bad for your tank, but you know, won't pressurize the actual system.
Portion. Yeah, true.
So you're balancing it safer for the tank, less chance of catastrophic blowout, you know, or one or the other.
I would definitely think about pushing through if I had it a calcium reactor mounted like somewhere over my sump or somewhere above water, where if there was a leak somewhere, it's leaking.
I mean, this thing isn't going to only hold so much pressure. So, but,
true.
So I don't know. I would absolutely think about that. So then you just set this guy up. Once you get it to the right pressure, then I would start this thing off and just pick a bubble rate and slowly turn it down. And so what you'll notice on your pH reactor or regulators, it just stays on all the time. And we want to turn it until it just starts to turn off, and then turn it back again. So it's just allowing just a little bit more bubbles by natural than you would have with your regulator. And even if you don't have this thing, it's the same thing with the needle valve. Is I'm going to tune the needle valve back so it allows just a little bit more air than my controller would normally allow. So if the controller were to ever go kaput, then the needle valve will be the safety mechanism.
That's the main point here, because a lot of people will be like, well, I can just turn this thing to less than a bubble a second, in which case it's just feeding a whole bunch in there. So my CO2 regulators or my pH controller always has my CO2 regulator off. But when that fails, or everything fails, but if that were to fail, when that would fail, this is set to a whole bunch of bubbles and with nothing to shut it down. In which case, you're shooting CO2 in there.
So that's another good thing, man, to talk about. Actually, is when you're evaluating whether or not you want to have a apex, or you want to have like something simple, like one of these guys, these Milwaukee guys right here. If you're deciding between one of those two things, another thing that's cool is if you're monitoring the pH of your tank, and say something catastrophic happens and like multiple levels of failure happen. Well, now I can turn off this pump, right? Which is another good reason to have a feed pump instead of like doing a siphon or whatnot.
Or manifold.
Yeah. And so, or off of a manifold, is with a feed pump, especially one that pinches off the tube the way a peristaltic pump does, is I can now turn off the feed. And so if the pH in the tank ever goes too low, kind of indicating that something went wrong with the reactor, I can shut off water to the whole thing. Right, done. Now I've shut off the CO2, I've shut off the water, like everything could fail and it wouldn't matter anymore, and I catch it. So really, one of the best things to do is run a calcium reactor on a full controller. It just gives you way more levels of redundancy.
For sure.
All right, I think
we did the regulator. We did this. We
check valve.
Check valve. We talked about. Basically, all we have to do is put this thing into commission. Get it working.
Well, so I don't know if we're gonna actually get it running here live, but like the next thing that I would do is, we got our pump on, we got our CO2 regulator, and we know in our case what our consumption of 2-part is go over to that guy's awesome calculator. It's called Calcium Reactor Setup Help.
Yep.
right? And I can just put in a couple of different fields in that thing, and it will tell me the exact flow rate I need. So in this case, what I did is I told it that I have a 35 DKH coming out of the reactor.
Which we know because we
Yep.
tested it with the exact same media, exact
Yep.
same calcium reactor at a whole bunch of different pH set points.
Yep, and then we did the, we know that we used 150 milliliters of BRS 2-part a day, and then boom, it tells you, go ahead and set this thing at like 20 and a half milliliters a day, and now you'll have matched your old 2-part.
Yeah.
Done. Right, and
easy.
so what I'll do then again is come back tomorrow, and it will tell me, or I'll measure my alkalinity tank, and if it's dropping, I can change it. One of the cool things that calculator actually has too is that you can actually enter some information, and then it will recalibrate and tell you the exact dose and pH or concentration that you should have.
Yeah.
If you want to change either one. I don't know if that's necessary in this case because it's just so easy to just add a little bit more, test tomorrow, and see where you're at. I would call this. I mean, it's hard to look at this thing and say it's easier than 2-part, but once you set it up,
Once you get it all set up
I
and
mean, there's
going.
nothing as easy as coming by and turning a little knob and,
Yeah.
and changing the potent or the amount you dose every day.
Yeah.
You can do it with 2-part too, I guess, and just crank it over the same way, but they're almost identical once you've set it up properly.
And you've covered these in Refax already too, haven't you?
Oh, yeah,
On
so there's
the
so
whole
many of them.
setup, the whole flow adjusting, the whole pH adjusting thing.
Yeah, so if you're looking for actual calcium reactor setup help, man, we went through the whole thing in a Refax.
Don't rewind this one over and over and try to pick up all the bits of it. There's full produced videos that are quick, to the point, and short.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure.
I think that's it, man. The thing tells us to have a 35 DKH coming out of it. We achieved that with a 6.5 and the 2 reborn media. And then it says to have 20 milliliters a minute, which we achieved here.
Easy.
As easy peasy done.
That's it.
So that's about all there really is to it. And then tomorrow, man, you just adjust, and definitely get a HANA checker, man.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way. You can do it inside of a minute, which means you'll actually do it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
I think it goes up to 20 DKH, right?
Yeah, the max is 20 DKH that it can read the resolution on that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was times where I was in like those ranges of pH on a calcium reactor where nobody really ventures, like 6.2,
Okay.
unless you have like some super high demand and super low flow rate type thing. But then I had to do like a third or like quarter. Yeah, quarter.
2.5 milliliters to 7.5.
Yeah, 5 mils and 5 mils RODI water, 5 mils of effluent. And like fill up a little cup with effluent. Don't try to like measure out 5 mils straight from the tube.
Yeah.
The potency of the alkalinity in the effluent will not start to deteriorate when you fill it up. When you fill up a little cup.
Yeah.
So the air is not going to bother it like in the short amount of time that you're testing. So fill up a little cup, then draw 5 mils, and then draw 5 mils RODI.
That's a good thing to just to bring home here is if when you're measuring the effluent of it, that means you're measuring the strength. So just the water that's coming out the final tube here, and fill it up in a little cup and draw it out and measure it in your checker or your test kit. And you'll probably have to dilute it by half if
Yeah.
you're going insane concentration, maybe by a quarter, but definitely there. All right, let's just hit. So let's ask this question: can a Trident control a calcium reactor? I don't know the answer to that question, but other than I know that he wants to.
So right now, it's not like 2-part dosing with the Trident, where there is Trident controlled dosing. In that, if my alkalinity starts to go down, the Trident can tell my doser to increase the dose, and it just makes these little adjustments like day and night, and it's all programmable in there. Right now there isn't a function that does that automatically for the calcium reactor, but some pioneers out there, including Terrence himself, uses the Trident to control different pH set points, in which case it's changing the concentration of the effluent, and he's doing it by the hundredths of a pH point. So like 6.51, and if the alkalinity starts to go, he goes 6.50 or something like that. So you can really kind of play around with it if you're smart on the programming and you got a pretty good conceptual idea of how this works and how that relates to alkalinity and all this other stuff. Definitely for the pioneers out there right now.
For sure, it's going to do it out of the box.
Yeah.
There's no, because it can do it, it will do it.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, can you use the dose to feed the calcium reactor? And the answer is kind of yes and no. So one of the things that people don't really think about is, hey, I could do 20 milliliters a minute, but the dose isn't a continuous duty dosing pump. So its on-off ratio is like a 3-to-1 or something like that. So what I could do is tell the dose to dose 100 milliliters a minute and beyond for 1/4 the amount of time.
Yeah.
And there's 2 pumps in there, so I could actually run both of them. And in all reality, man, I would still probably suggest using this guy right here because it's just a simpler, probably quieter operation as well at that flow rate. But like you definitely could, and that's an important factor is like it doesn't actually have to be continuous all the time. I mean, if there was a way, if it was going to dose, a total of 20,000 milliliters a day. You could do it in 1,000 milliliter spurts, if you can do it accurately. It doesn't have to be done continuously. You can make some arguments as to why it does it continuously, but or why it might be better, but it doesn't have to. You don't do 2-part continuously all day long, right?
Right.
And so, maybe it would be better if you did, but not that much better. Right? And one of the other things is you do add a little bit of CO2 to the tank, so the pH generally drops a little bit.
Yeah, this is why we have in the refugium section.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we put it right here. It's going to feed into the refugium, and the refugium presumably is going to suck out all the excess CO2 and just isn't going to be an issue.
We know it has an increasing effect, specifically with like the horticulture specific light in our Cato testing. The difference in pH was astronomical. Difference between
in the actual chamber too.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll suck up all the CO2. Definitely at night, possibly even during the day with a little bit of ambient light that's in here. So it'll definitely help with it, and that's why we chose to put it right there.
Yeah.
All right, let's answer another question. Vertex not big enough for a 300-gallon reef. I'd say at 300 gallons, you are right at the edge of this.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're going to have wall-to-wall SPS corals, like where they're just bonsai together, I'd go buy a monster one.
Get a bigger one.
Yeah, I'd get a super, super monster one.
Plus,
for 300 gallons less, man, this is adequate.
Yeah. No, I mean, especially on a system that large, and just thinking back to WWC tanks on the 900, the 500, and all of their systems, is they don't run a continuous duty dosing pump. They just have the effluent pouring out of the thing and then adjust the pH for the most part. But on those type of systems, the amount of media that they go through and the amount of contact time that they have, if you have the smaller the calcium reactor you're going to be swapping out that media all constantly. You're going to see it, dissolve a lot faster, which then you're changing the concentrations again. But that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. Biggest one that you can fit in your space and reasonably afford, use that one.
Yeah, I would definitely, anything that fits your budget and is the largest one you can. This one, I would just say I personally like this one a lot just because of this chamber. And like if I were ever going to design a calcium reactor, it would definitely have a big chamber with a small pipe going into the top right here and a small pipe coming to the bottom with a big pipe in the middle, which will allow the air and water to separate in the middle and stop a vast majority of the air from getting sucked in the recirculation pump, because that's where all the noise comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is the number one reason why I would probably use this guy right here. Also uses a CJ pump, which are pretty well known. All right. If you are using, let's see, Jamie Cooley, if you're using the Apex pH probe in the reactor, should you add a second one in general for pH in the tank? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can, I would absolutely do that. So you can do it one of two ways. With an Apex normal or EL, you just have one port, so you have to buy the little extra module. Right.
The PM1, yeah.
The PM1. You can also, I guess, use one of these. Pick one up separately. I don't know why you do that, but you could. But if you're going to use if you're going to buy a calcium reactor setup, do yourself a favor and get the standard Apex plus another probe. Right.
Yeah.
And then another pH probe, and you can use the ORP probe for the pH and have two. One monitors the tank, one monitors inside the reactor. So one's managing the strength of this guy, and one is providing safety for your tank from a whole slew of things, including an overdose or something from one of these.
For sure.
You pick one up.
Well, so Harkins Aquatics is asking, do you really need a pH controller if you have a carbon doser?
Yes.
So yeah, basically that's telling that. So you probably could do it without it. Like you said, there's ways. There's people got this thing dialed in where they know the exact bubble rate, they know the exact bubble count, the bubble size, feeding into their reactor where it gives them this much effluent and DKH, and you're not really controlling it by pH at that point. You could, but and that's what a lot of people do is that I find this one's easier to tune because it's digital rather than turning a needle valve and adjusting my bubble count and all these other things. Like this one is all electronically based off of time. So reasonably I could say that at bubble every 9 seconds it keeps my tank at this much, and then a bubble at every 8 seconds keeps my tank at this much. But just the added layer of redundancy and control and protection for the tank, I'd run everything off of them.
So you can also eliminate a very confusing component.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So the confusing component is if I adjust the flow rate up, I now need to adjust my CO2 up in unison with it to be able to keep the pH inside of the tank the same. So I'm adding more water, I need to add more CO2. And so there's this natural relationship that you can just forget about if you manage the pH with a controller that just pegs it at 6.5.
Makes it easy.
So can you peg it at 6.5 using this thing? Yeah, but we're going to have to manage it together, and if either one is a little off, then it gets a little off. And so what I would say is that I would personally always use the pH controller, and then I would use this as a backup, but you can use a needle valve as a backup as well. It doesn't have to be this expensive thing. This is probably I guess I would call this more optional than this or this.
I agree.
If I could only afford one of these items, the pH controller, the Comor dosing pump, or this thing, it would be the pH controller, and then the pump, and then this thing.
Then that one. Yeah, I agree.
Because this is the thing that I could probably do without the most.
Yeah, it's a convenience for you. There was, I like this, Todd asked down at the bottom. Basically, why? So we're hooking this up on the BRS160. Why are we going to? He missed why we're not going to continue with the Triton method.
Oh, so we're switching the tank over to the BRS hybrid method, most of which we've already done. We just haven't gotten around to switching over to the calcium reactor. And in the hybrid method, man, you could really actually use two-part if you wanted to. In this case, they all use calcium reactors in every one of their systems there.
WWC, yeah.
Yeah, and we use it on the one up in the XXL 750. He used it on his home tank. Yeah. And you just want to get more experience and share more stuff with people. Essentially, the 160 is just a giant.
It's been an ongoing experiment.
Yeah, you just get to see and watch, and then what happens is if we put it on here, also, a few weeks from now you'll hear, well, you know what we learned. And you get to hear and experience that, which is totally different than reading some bullet points on the packaging or something. Yeah. So
it's nothing against the Triton method. The Triton method worked for us for we almost had it up for another year and a half, I think. And then we had Zeovit before that. But then we also said that stop changing things on the BRS160. That's what we learned out of all of this, where we're turning this one into the hybrid, where we remove the sand and we're swapping a few things out here and there. So.
Hey, this thing will probably always be a test tank to some degree, so always ebbs and flow in the success that we're having, because we're constantly changing things, so you guys can see, not only watch it happen, but also, you get to see, our opinions on what happened, which is, something I think is pretty valuable.
Yeah,
hopefully.
I agree.
So, so nothing wrong with the Triton method. Triton method for me, still probably the best two-part you could use if you're using a refugium, because it's the only one that addresses the trace elements that are uptaken during with a refugium. Probably also an algae scrubber.
And with the 4-liter bottle set that they have coming out now, or that they just came out with, using the same math that we did for all these other ones, that one works out to about $21 a month.
It was actually way cheaper than most of the other retail two-parts out there. And it wouldn't seem like that because you're only getting 1-liter things, but they're just way more concentrated than the other options out there. Yeah. So the fact that it's actually cheaper than most of the other two-parts out there was super surprising to me. And if I was going to use a commercial two-part and I had a refugium, man, that's probably what I'd use.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, what's the benefit over the BRS Pharma, which is $3 a month? I better.
It has trace elements. It's concentrated. I like the concentrated portion because we were dosing 150, 160 some mils of 2 parts of the BRS160, and then when we switched over to the Triton, it was like 50 mils because it's so concentrated. So
yeah, it was super. Yeah, it was really, really low.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
That's less wear and tear on your pumps.
Yeah.
That's
less fluid sitting around.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, is it worth the $17 a month? It's kind of a value mix for each person. All right. Would you recommend shutting the calcium reactor off when dosing Kalkwasser at night to raise the pH? I don't think that I'd get that level of complexity when you're like, just kind of switching things on and off like that. There's just way more opportunity for failure and forgetting things when you adjust them at later times. So, the best thing I would do is if you're going to use Kalkwasser and the calcium reactor at the same time, I'd get the most use I can get out of my Kalkwasser as possible. So, fully saturate to the best of your ability, the auto top off water, and just dose that. And then use my calcium reactor to make up whatever's left over.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? It's probably the cheapest method. And
I've seen a lot of the SPS. So a lot of my friends who are growing a big, 500-600 gallon systems in their garages, and friends with big tanks that were running calcium reactors, they all were using Kalkwasser in their ATOs still too. They'd fill up like a 20-30 gallon tank or what have you with Kalkwasser and use it as their ATO. Buffer the pH for one, and then
Kalkwasser is one of the only ways to add calcium alkalinity like that easy. It's like probably the cheapest method of doing it.
Takes the little bit of hit off of your calcium reactor as far as working.
Balances it. So it definitely helps with the pH. If you're not going to run a refugium or anything like that, I've heard people considering dumping the effluent into your calcium reactor, or your,
skimmer.
Into your protein skimmer, in which case the air-water interchange in there should gas off any excess CO2 and bring balance with the atmosphere around it. My feedback is you might end up cleaning your pump a lot more if you're putting that level of high calcium alkalinity into it.
Yeah,
that's my guess is the pump will bind up more often, but it could actually, maybe it's worth it, to have a higher pH in your tank all the time, and then every 3 months have to clean my pumps instead of every 6 or whatnot. That might be a trade-off worth doing.
Yeah.
And I'd be more likely to do an AC pump where the tolerances are like a little looser than on a DC pump where it's probably going to jam more often, and that's a pretty blanket statement, but I might look into that anyway. All right, we'll answer a handful more of these things, man. We'll call it a day. All right.
Yeah, Joe's got a good question. Is there a way to remove the phosphate from the reborn media?
All right, so
kind of brainstorm this one a little bit. It's if you think about say the Pucani, the rock, or these ocean, mined rocks that we used to get for the aquariums and stuff like that that would have phosphates and just dead organics and stuff on there. Not far-fetched from what we're grabbing here. I mean, they're basically just sieving out different sizes of, sand and coral coral skeletons and stuff from these really sandy, rocky type areas, putting it in a jug and sending it on its way. So, could you cure it like you could cure rock? That probably works to some degree.
It's possible you could bleach cure it. I don't know if all that stuff would work. It's probably bound up actually, in the skeleton as you melt it. So definitely, we talked about putting the Brightwell little cubes of export media in the second chamber. The reason we're talking about those Brightwell ones is kind of like, they're kind of coated in a dust of GFO in a pore network that makes it all available and allows water to flow around it, so it won't turn into a big, clump, because it normally needs to tumble to not turn into a big clump. Yeah. So in this case, that might be a good option. We haven't tested it or anything, but
we also haven't tested like what the overall effect of how much it adds phosphate to your tank.
Yep.
Is it a little? Is it a lot? Is it noticeable. I don't know.
It's probably a noticeable amount of
Yeah.
phosphate going into the system from that. It depends on the media again. And again, like I don't know if anybody knows the guys over at Elos, man. Bug them about why they don't still or call. I don't know if Corvus still represents those guys anymore. But I'll bug the Elo guys, man, about selling that one media that was synthetic.
They've got Destaco type of media out too.
right.
That's one I didn't get a test, but supposedly a higher quality type of media, similar to I think what Elos used to make or what have you. But
to get a synthetic media, I think that would absolutely be a good option to that. All right, what is the best process to replace media in the reactor? So the guys over at Worldwide shared that they top it off once and then they dump it out. So
yeah, so basically these medias are going to go down, especially specifically in the main chamber as it gets dissolved. You're going to see that level just slowly go down over months or however long.
Particles will get smaller and smaller as they eat out uniformly.
So that means I can just dump more on top, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But as that continues to get smaller and smaller, then if you continue to top off and top off and top off, the old stuff that's still there gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where it can start clogging things.
Yeah. So there's a point where you don't want all those small little bits in there, and so when you reach that point, so I think that's a reasonable thing is to say is top it off once. You can monitor. They're using the Carib C, so it might matter the type of media you're using. I'd visually look at it and see how big this stuff is, but as it gets smaller, just toss it out.
Yeah.
So there is a point where you just want to get the little bits out because you're going to cause more problems, and then it will help. And maybe you just use it until it causes your problem, and then you understand that's where the point is, I guess. Yeah. That might be not the greatest idea, but
and dump it out, rinse it, add more media, go again.
Yep, there you go. So do you know if there's any concern about using steel CO2 canister versus aluminum? The one thing that I did find out is there is such a thing as food grade CO2. So I don't know about the steel versus aluminum question. It's just causing the air here. The aluminum won't rust. It's in a neighborhood of salt water. So I'm gonna say right now, actually,
steel will rust like crazy. Yeah.
Use the aluminum ones. The steel ones are gonna rust all over you. So probably doesn't matter so much as what's in it. I don't know that for sure, but I can't imagine. But there are food grade. It's used for food and stuff. So if you can find like a restaurant outlet or whatnot, you can get food grade CO2, which is probably way different than welding CO2, even though that's what most people are using.
Right.
I don't think it's going to change the universe, but it's purer and been certified as such. So if you really, really, really want to nerd out on your CO2, that's the way to do it. All right. Would you want your pH at 6.8? All right. Say you want your pH at 6.8. Do you set your apex to turn on at 6.8 and then off at 6.81? Okay. Yeah, I would probably keep it a pretty tight range like that. I didn't read the whole question here, but it gets pretty small. But yeah, you're gonna want to keep it at a pretty tight range. Have it turn off at like a few hundredths of a point.
Yeah, I think when I was running the test, it wasn't the apex, but it was the reef keeper, or the reef the controller. But I had a hysteresis, which was the amount of swing it would have. So if my set point was 6.4, it would allow for 300ths, so 0.03 of a hysteresis. So it could rise up to 6.43, and then it would kick on the CO2. And then the CO2, that would bring the pH down, and then that could go as low as 6.37. And then it would shut it off. So it had a little barrier there, but I found that 300ths of a hysteresis space, both top and bottom, was enough to keep it steady at 6.4.
There you go. So one of the things is every power cycles and moving parts is what wears things out. So you got a solenoid that's in there, it's closing and opening a valve, and the more times it closes and opens, the more valves you're going to be buying. It's gonna, if it opens up 3 times as often, it's gonna die 3 times as fast.
Right.
Also, even the regulators, like every electronics, for the most part, like the more power cycles, the more frequently you're gonna have, it's gonna die. So I would definitely probably keep it within a few hundredths of a point.
Yeah.
But
that's a good place.
I wouldn't go down to 1.
Well, now, I wouldn't let it swing. For sure, wouldn't let it swing a whole tenth of a point, because there's a difference in 6.4 and 6.5 and 6.3 in the concentration of the effluent. In which case, if I'm letting it fluctuate that far, I could be changing my effluent harder to dial this thing in, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, just 4 more questions here. Let us know how fast you go through the gas cylinders. So yeah, again, like the guy said earlier, like why we changed it here is so we can share information like that. So we will absolutely share that with you. And you can get big canisters, you can get little ones. You know, I know some people try to use paintball ones.
These little 5-pounders are probably the most common. I would
How long
imagine.
did it last you on your 90?
A long time. I was right. I didn't have a full-blown SP. It wasn't full-blown, full-grown-out SPS, so it was like medium demand or so. And I don't think I filled it but one time in like two years that it was set up.
So a long time. There you go.
Yeah. It's $20-30 a pop when you do it. So it's
I've
not
heard
even
people
cost.
change them every 6 months or something like that. So it's kind of thing like I have 2 propane tanks at my house. So like when one goes, I can bring the back one. There's always one full in my house because I inevitably always run out in the middle of whatever I'm cooking. You don't want to run out here, so make sure that you just have that extra one. Around. All right. Do you suggest starting the tank with a calcium reactor? Is it fine until you need to dose? This is what I'd say is you can do anything you want here.
Yeah.
If you know you're going calcium reactor from the beginning, just start it from the beginning because stability and what you're going to want to learn when there are no corals in the tank.
Yeah, for sure.
You're supporting calcareous algae like coralline algae and whatnot. So learn during that point the little bumps and stuff that you're going to figure out and your equipment set up and whatnot. If you're going that way anyway, do it then. You can also do it later. In this case, I would say the tank likes stability. But this isn't really, that life-changing to the tank. It's just maintaining the same levels.
For sure, too, yeah.
All right. If you were if you were to do a calcium reactor on a budget, how would you do that? Well, man.
I mean, the most budget, somebody could probably build one of these things on their own, DIY-wise. If you're going super ultra low budget, we've brainstormed about how to make one out of a 5-gallon bucket. But
you could probably make them out of that. We've talked about making them out of big, PVC fittings and stuff. Yeah. But you actually, the reactor is one of the cheapest things in the whole thing, right? So if you go actually look at what a cheap octopus reactor costs, I don't know if the reactor is actually the place to save the money. It's all this other stuff.
Yeah, true.
So
I mean, there's other ways to feed it. Like if you want to utilize your return pump to feed your calcium reactor, since you already have a return pump, manifold off you can definitely manifold off and use a ball valve. We had a port set in here for something like that when we first were plumbing it.
I'm gonna give you bad news, man. I'm gonna say don't do anything you can't do well. So if you're going to do it super, super cheap, expect problems, and I don't want to give you any recommendation that I know is going to cause you problems.
True.
So there isn't a lot of advantages. If you're a gear junkie and you can't buy any of the gear, then what's the point, right? Because the 2-part, or calc-washer and stuff, is just so much easier to do.
It works up to the same levels, if not.
It's way cheaper if you're on a budget. It's way cheaper. But I guess, if you're going to really try to do it cheap and you want to defy that because doing it cheap and having gear is what makes this a hobby for you specifically and you want to defy my advice, I think I would buy the cheapest reactor I could possibly buy. I wouldn't save on the build of that thing.
No.
Then I would probably, use a gravity fed, which I just hate.
I mean, you could go as
There's so many ways that could go wrong.
The MaxiJet 1200 with some push connect fittings on it.
Yep.
I mean,
get a 1200.
That's like a $15 pump.
No, those are more expensive nowadays. They're like 40, man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So at 37 or something anyway. So you get a $30-40 pump to feed it, and then just use the needle valve, and then skip the carbon doser, and you're gonna have to really monitor the relationship between the carbon dioxide and the flow rate. And that may be fun for you, actually. If do-it-yourself projects are cool, really understanding the chemistry of how each one of these reacts with each other might be the coolest part of the whole hobby for you. But be prepared; it's just a lot harder, and there are more things to go wrong over time.
True.
get clogged and interfere with each other, and less notifications of when they go wrong too. So it's not like how long would it take for you to notice if one of those things went wrong is the biggest question.
Budget doesn't mean better, and doesn't necessarily mean the best or good. Like good enough is a tough mentality.
I try to, when I say budget, man, I just try to think of not like how much money I get to spend, like how much money I got to spend to do this well.
Yeah.
Right? And then I can do two-part well for almost nothing.
For a long time.
I mean, I can do a two-part well for $3 a month and just pour it in.
Yeah, that was easy.
like done, right?
Yeah.
A dosing pump now, like you can get a 3-headed dosing pump for pretty cheap, man. BRS parts $80 for 2 of them.
It'll take you to that dream tank that you can brag about to all your friends.
Yep.
Without all the gear, without all the expense.
Yeah. All right, next one. Is there a way to calculate the flow rate through compared to the amount of 2-parts you've used before?
There you go.
Yeah.
Calculator for it.
Yeah,
you did a video on it.
Yeah, I have a video on it. It's JD's Calcium Reactor Setup Help Guide.
Yep.
You can Google his calculator. You can search for our thing. I did a video on it because it's not like the most straightforward thing. It's definitely designed for the nerdier.
There's some math. There's some testing involved.
But, like I just after you know the few things that are supposed to go in this field, like this is easy. But it's just a little helpful to have somebody point them out.
True.
So there's actually a Google Calcium Reactor Setup Help. There's a left side and a right side. And on the right side is a little column that tells you, based on your 2-part, this is what your starting way you should set up the reactor. And then the other side is adjusting it. So if your tank is this, and then after 48 hours it's this, and alkalinity of your effluent is X, adjust it to this. Yeah. And it just tells you 2 real precise numbers, no garbage, you don't have to understand. Just enter the fields right, and boom, you've got the right equation.
Where to start.
All right. Well, we wrapped up all the questions. Thank you all very much. And I don't know, there was like $14 worth of free coffee for Randy and I.
For
so,
sure.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That's just a little
coffee.
message that you guys appreciate what we're doing. I don't know. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, see you next week.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right. Peace.